Have you tried everything with your kids? Well, try this. Millions of parents have gone through the same struggles that you are right now. You've tried timeouts, rewards, punishments, and even bribery, but nothing seems to be working. It's like your kids are deliberately trying to drive you crazy. But I'm here to tell you that there's hope. In this video, I'm going to share with you some secrets that will help you finally get through to your kids and start seeing some positive changes. So don't give up yet. Watch this video and find out what to do when everything else has failed. When you feel like you've tried everything with your kids and still don't know how to get them to listen, I want you to try these ideas. Number one, work with your child to create a list of their favorite things to do. I think of this as meeting your child where your child is. Let me illustrate this with a story. I have a friend, and we're going to call him Brian. Recently, he talked with me about how he feels so distant from his son, Andy. Andy spends most of his time playing video games, but Brian is a brilliant, driven, type A surgeon. He worked his way through college and medical school, and this guy deserves every accolade he's ever received. He came from very little, and now he is the go-to surgeon. Brian has tried many things to get closer to Andy. He's a very involved dad, but he still feels a distance in their relationship. Every evening, he's there, he's involved, helping Andy with his homework. This often just leads to a lot of conflict because Andy is careless and doesn't really care about school. He also recently took Andy camping. Boy, was that a frustrating experience. Brian loves to camp. He used to do that with his family growing up. He thought this would be a nice way to connect with Andy. It was not a nice way. Brian came away with the experience very frustrated because for the most part, all Andy did was complain about how cold it was, and they didn't even talk much. I could see that Brian was trying to connect with Andy in ways that were important to Brian, like school or spending time outdoors. I suggested that he find an activity that Andy was interested in. It was unlikely that Brian would play video games, which Andy loved, but he did mention that Andy loved comic books. So I just suggested that he find a way to connect with Andy through comics. Well, there just so happened to be a comic convention, Comic-Con, coming up, and I suggested they attend this together. I also recommended that he just sit down with Andy and ask questions about the comics, what he liked, what his favorites were, why this was his favorite, and just any other question you could come up with, just to get Andy talking about his interests. Asking and listening were really meant to be ways that he could connect with Andy, and it turned out that the Comic-Con was so much fun for them both. So something simple like this made a huge difference in their relationship, at least according to Brian. He told me that they had spent more time that week just being with each other, and he finally saw some excitement from his son, like a genuine enjoyment of just being with his dad. I had the same experience recently with my son, Brian. I love to play golf, and I decided this would be a really cool way for Brian and I to spend some time together. It was really one of the main ways that I connected with my own dad growing up, and even my grandfather. When I was young, that's all I ever wanted to do was play golf with them. I soon realized with Brian that golf was not going to be our form of connection. He was not interested. He did not like it. So I had to start looking at other ways to connect with him. And Brian loved his dirt bike. So I started doing that with him. I bought a dirt bike and I started going out with him. This started a couple years ago. It's now been a thing that we do together. And I can't tell you how many really neat experiences we've had up in the mountains just sitting there after a ride. To be honest, I'd still rather be golfing, but I have found this really special way to connect with him, and it's been very meaningful for our relationship. My point in sharing these stories is that when you feel like you've tried everything and you still feel disconnected from your child, get creative, meet them where they are, engage in their interests. You'll be surprised how this changes things for your relationship. Hey, before I share with you another real life example, I'd love for you to subscribe and hit the like button. I'm putting more videos like this out on my channel every week, and I'll send you more videos. Let me share with you another story about how to meet someone where they are. When I was a new therapist, my first job was in an outpatient clinic that was part of a hospital. It was a really great first job. It allowed me to see a lot of kids and gave me a lot of experience. My interest has always been working with young people, but I'm telling you, therapy with kids is a lot more challenging than it is with motivated adults who really want to be there in the first place, because very often I'd have a teenager come into my office and the teenager was unwilling or maybe a partially willing captive. And many times these parents were forcing these kids to come see me, hoping that I would somehow help them. But you usually can't just sit down with a kid and start doing talk therapy with them. They don't know me, and it's just awkward answering my questions. No kid really wants to sit there for an hour being forced to talk. And so I learned early on that I had to find creative ways of developing a relationship, of connection, of meeting that kid where that kid is. And then we could have a meaningful experience. One day I saw this new client, a mother who wanted me to see her son. And she was there for the first session, just her. She was going to give me the backstory. So we'll call her son Bobby. And she told me that Bobby was going to come see me whether he liked it or not. And I was not his first therapist. In fact, she told me that he had already been to over a dozen psychiatrists and therapists, none of whom he would even speak to. He wouldn't even utter a single word. And she felt like they had tried everything imaginable and were now only seeing me out of pure desperation. So I'm up for a treat now. Next week, I'm going to see this boy, and the bar for success is actually pretty low because all I have to do is get him to speak or to even grunt, and then I've made some progress. What I didn't know ahead of time was that Bobby had a medical condition that required him to be in a wheelchair full time. So I met Bobby for the first time as his mother wheeled him into my office. His head was down, looking at the floor, and she pushed him right up to my chair and said, "Good luck," and then turned around and walked out. And there sat Bobby, head slumped, staring straight at the floor, living up to the promise that I was not gonna be the first person he spoke to. And over the next 2 sessions, I tried everything I could think of. My questions went unanswered, my magic tricks were ignored, my riddles went unsolved. I tried to play cards, pool, there's a duck pond out there. I tried everything with him. And it didn't take long before I realized that there was nothing I was gonna be able to do to get him to talk to me. Well, before our 3rd session began, I had already planned on telling his mom that, she could add me to her list of therapy disappointments. I had done everything I could. And at this point, she was just wasting her time and her money to bring him to see me. And I'm sure Bobby would have agreed with that wholeheartedly. This is where it gets interesting. And I think it's because I had already given up. I'd already accepted the fact there's no chance I was going to connect with this kid. I just sort of decided to meet him where he was that day in a very literal sense, meaning I was going to physically meet him where he was. And I didn't even really think about this at the time. I spontaneously did it. So when Bobby came in for his next appointment, rolls in, head down at the floor, I just laid down on the floor underneath his head and I looked up into his face. And so here's Bobby sitting in front of me, head facing the floor, and there I am laying on the floor directly underneath his head. And little did I know that this created a dilemma for Bobby, because now he had to look at me. He couldn't look away. So here we are, me laying on the ground, looking at his face, and this is when he uttered his first words with a smirk on his face. "What the hell are you doing?" Bobby could not believe that I was laying on the ground looking up at him. This was not how professionals acted. My response to what I was doing was that I was bored, and I found it a lot more comfortable laying down than staring at the top of his head. And that was the first smile or smirk of our next 10 sessions. And we did it in this format. He would roll into my office, I'd lie down on the floor under his face, and we'd talk for an hour. I actually looked forward to this because it was the most comfortable therapy session of my day. But I also looked forward to it because I actually found a way to get this boy to engage with me. Hey, if you've really been struggling with your child, start with these points, but I have more for you. If you'll click the link below, it'll take you to a place where you can download my free ebook.